I think the sci-fi slash horror, or the combination of as a genre in film, could be one of my favourite. And if you give it some thought, most sci-fi or modern sci-fis have a hint of horror in them, especially the more adult focused material. So it's quite an easy area to pull in loads of media to. That's why I feel it's important for me to stipulate how I came to choose these 10 films and what I've put in to sort of stop flooding the list with material you may have already be over familiar with. I don't need to see another video about The Thing for the rest of my life. Don't get me wrong, I love that film, but it's been overanalyzed on the internet. Same goes for a lot of the Ridley, Prometheus, Covenant material, and the Aliens franchise. I have not included in this list. I've put a year buffer on 2005. That also means that Event Horizon falls out of the category. Again, a fantastic film and extremely applicable to this video, but I don't think you guys need to hear about it again. I've gone with a broader spectrum as possible, also trying to stray out of Western cinema as much as I could, so hopefully some of these films may be an eye-opener for you. Let's get started with number 10, which isn't actually a film. I've already broken one of my rules.
Authorized private Philip Marshall.
This is Blomkamp's Oat Studio work, which came onto YouTube very early on, 5 to 4 years ago. There's loads of videos on the actual Oat Studio channel. But Netflix recently, within I think the last 8 or 9 months, put the whole thing on their streaming service as an entire body of work, and some of them are amazing. They're like vignettes. They're maybe 20 minutes long, 10 minutes long. There's a bunch of them. One of them is extremely sci-fi with a huge xenomorph, Last of Us style, Rat King, multi-limbed nightmare. It also allows us to see and hear Sigourney in a decent sci-fi role. Blomkamp got really close to putting together an Alien film that would have been in canon with the story after Aliens, and it never got off the ground. But it's great to see and hear one of my favourite actresses of that era.
You don't fucking...
Wait. My friend. We need your help.
The CGI has suffered, which is understandable. You're looking at a 4 to 5 year old engine, but I remember first seeing it on YouTube way back and being quite knocked back at how realised these universes are, how post-apocalyptic some of the stories are, and how gory and outlandish a lot of the ideas were. There's like a home shopping channel with a multi-bladed chainsaw slash cooking implement that ends up cutting the presenter's hand off.
And it's really a showstopper. It is the Damasu 950.
South Korea now gets a swing at the old rope with The Host, and it has been remade. Unwritten rule, we don't feature any remakes on this list. That's a no-brainer, but we do have some pretty cool monster effects with this. This really took me back. I remember seeing it a long time ago on its first year of launch and not expecting it to be such a good monster film and also have that much sort of military, sci-fi and science in it. It's a very cool study of how this creature completely terrorizes this family. Some of these actors you may recognize from Parasite. The mixture of the practical, the really cool sets, the amazing acting and the CGI blending quite well with all that aforementioned. It's not a horrible looking film when you sit down with it in 2022. The story is incredibly convoluted though towards the end, and having to pay attention to a lot of the dialogue but at the same time wanting to soak up those visuals is quite a task. I remember The Mimic being a very good film in this direction, also with pretty cool anatomical freakish things in and around the monsters, and it having like a nest and doing weird stuff with the victims, storing them, and having like a backstory and its origin story being quite shrouded in mystery. And you're given quite a lot of cool stuff to mull over at the end.
Children behave. That's what they say when we're together.
Alright, it's time for Cloverfield Lane, 10 Cloverfield Lane. This director's got 2 films on this list. Little spoiler for what's coming up. I was so impressed with what actually happened with this film. It went through a rebranding and it was sort of gobbled up by the studio that Abrams has, Bad Robot or something. So the end is kind of tacked on, but the actual main substance and the 3 main acts in that bunker are amazing. The relationship and chemistry and dynamic between Goodman and these other 2 actors is pretty mind-blowing. I want to talk about that. Goodman's performance especially. As a UK boomer, a lot of you across the ponds might not know that we grew up with Roseanne. being put on our Channel 4 most weeknights. I grew up with John Goodman being like the ideal archetypical dad that you'd want, the man of reason and the guy that never really lost his temper. I didn't see his performance in The Big Lebowski till later life, and his unhinged side as an actor was something I hadn't explored. So this was such a sweet spot for me. It was seeing him in a brand new, quite literal light.
You think I'm an idiot?
I also read a book at school when I was a kid called Z for Zachariah, and the teacher that forced that book upon us didn't quite realise how I think it would affect a lot of the individuals, because it was a horror story about a nuclear apocalypse and not being able to leave a particular area because of contamination, and there was all this stuff to do with what you were wearing and the radiation getting through, and homemade sort of methods of combating a very hazardous, hostile environment. This film, with its ending, which I won't spoil or show, is a little bit of a mismatch. I'd much rather it have been full-blown nuclear zombie apocalypse.
You're going into this barrel while you're alive to feel it.
You'll leave here different.
Okay, we get to Nope from Jordan Peele. Some of you may not have even seen this yet, it's quite new. For me, I place it firmly second in his three films, going Us, Nope, and then Get Out. So it's not his finest piece of work. I have a little issue with the casting, particularly the main character, and killing off one of the finest horror actors of our time. You know who I'm talking about. Killed him off in the first 10 minutes, which broke my heart. But the main dude, who was also in Get Out and in Black Mirror, he's a very good actor, he's a British chap. He's playing the most stoic, boringest person you've ever had the misfortune to clap eyes on in a film. Anybody who's seen this would have noticed it. For some reason, he's been told to show no emotion at any given point, and it starts to get to you. Also, she is the most unhorsey person. They're neither of them are believable as people who run stables. I'm talking from experience. She's not on a horse once, and every time he is, it's from the back, he's got a hood on, it's all a little bit dodgy. It's not going to annoy normal people, it just stands out for me a little bit. It's also got one of the greatest villains in it from The Crow, one of my favourite films of all time, and he is also not used enough as far as I'm concerned.
The Oprah shot.
You guys gonna tell me what's going on?
Hell no.
Did you hear him go, that's about as much emotion as he gives in this film. He's also standing weird, looking weird. Okay, can we get to the good stuff? Because it's actually made it to your list, and there's a few reasons for this. Every single special effects shot looks goddamned incredible. Every single one. There's no point where you think, oof, that was a little bit dodgy. There's practical as much as they could possibly get away with, and there's a funny B story with a killer chimp, which gets you scratching your head to no end.
They're gonna come back. You ready?
Having it in a sci-fi horror list also kind of eliminates all of its supernatural ideas if you haven't seen it and may thought there were some. No, this is a hardcore science fiction film with loads of horror in it and real cool scares. Peele has always excelled in doing good scares or doing them properly. They're never cheap, well thought out, and he has an effects team that really boost his message. Also just done a list of some coincidental parallels with Jaws, funnily enough. So it was to do with like two main characters being around at the end in a secluded location with sort of no communications, no authority either. There's no access to like the police or the army, and there's also like a experienced elder captain character, right? And there's also an item attached to said threat so that they can identify when and where it is. And then there's the high pressure explosion, not a spoiler, and then someone you think is dead just reappearing as well right in the end act. There's no similarities. From the director of 10, Cloverfield Lane, is our second very modern film on the list, and it is Prey. Aubrey Plaza, a little bit obsessed with her appearance in Ingrid Goes West. That kind of blew me away because she quite literally is a piece of wood in Parks and Recreation. And talking of wood, there's a lot of it in Prey. They filmed it in the early settling period with some French colonials in there and some Native Americans. Aubrey's character is pretty incredible and doesn't feel forced either. There's a big thing with forced diversity in Hollywood at the moment, thank God. This was just damn good casting, really good writing. It was about time this series took a different angle, new timeline, new gender, amazing.
I'm ready.
There was a lot out there about the CGI, particularly that bear, and how a lot of the animals didn't carry over too well. The film didn't get the biggest budget, certainly didn't get what the early films did in the 90s. I think they've done very well with what they were given, and I think all the locations are really cool. They missed a key thing on her being covered in mud and not having the predator walk past her, and she actually gets in a pit of mud, crawls out of it, and is really close to where the predator is walking around, and they were just like, no, we're not going to do that scene. I'm thinking, what the hell? With the setting and timeline, I like the idea of the Predator as well being a feral version, and a little bit less advanced tech, a little bit more hands-on, slimmer, meaner, and almost faster with its movement and looks. That helmet and how rudimentary the laser was. There was a lot to love with the lore and backstory that they put in about the actual Predator itself. You've only got to look at the previous two films, Predators plural, and that one that Shane Black did that was a complete mess. This is a triumph above that stuff. It doesn't suffer too much from the dreaded jerky cam in the fight scenes as well. They're quite well choreographed, and I think the CGI is pretty strong where it's needed to be, which is in and around the Predator. And of course there was a lot of suit wearing and practicals. It's blatantly obvious when it's employed, but it doesn't look too bad. You're like, yeah, I don't mind them concentrating on that to keep that realism going, because the CGI, you get numb to it after a while. It's nice to have a good close-up shot of a Predator's foot.
Something in the mist! Shut the doors! Shut the doors!
It's a Stephen King adaptation in the form of The Mist, and one of the reasons I had to go back to 2005 is actually 2007, and this stood out for me. Wow, what a great use of monsters, practicals, and a crazy apocalyptic storyline that really pulls at every string you've got. Because of the fact that they're secluded, it's the classic King writing where every character's got their crazy nuances. There's a religious fanatic, there's a scared little kid, there's a couple who are arguing. You know the deal. It's brilliantly mapped out and brilliantly executed as a piece of film. Normally King's books can come over wrong. The Dark Tower comes immediately to mind, and of course the films that he's directed, Maximum Overdrive, holy shit.
Who she's gonna sacrifice to make it all better?
We want the board.
You try it.
Let's get back to The Mist, and I don't want to sing too loudly about how incredible the monsters and effects are, but the whole film quite literally revolves around how excellent all of these creatures look and how much fear they induce into the trapped population of that supermarket, and some of the crazy solutions or ideas they come up with to deal with said threats. It also has a very bleak ending and was reproduced as a TV series that came out, I think I'm going to say it was exclusive to Netflix. It was so awful. I was really thinking, how could you not have pulled like at least one thing from the film, because it's excellent, and anybody who would want to make a TV series would just think to extend this whole canon, replace all these cool characters, make it a mall, and just go with this angle, because it was just incredible to see it back in 2007, and again, it still holds up really well. What a great team, putting that CGI against those practicals and coming up with some absolutely nightmarish monsters. I had a debate with this one and Ex Machina because I'm a huge Alex Garland fan, and Annihilation did do it for me, but not the first time round. I was a little bit disappointed with how it ended and the structure of the story itself, and not seeing, as far as I was concerned, enough sort of creature gore. But it does pay out on it, and it is almost fungal, The Last of Us style alien alteration on a genetic level, but it's a pretty cool universe, and the characters are a little bit more in-depth than they initially appear in the opening first act. I'm not a big fan of Oscar Isaac being in everything, and of course Natalie is just too overpaid and overused in a lot of films now.
What do you think I do when you're away?
You think I'm out in the garden pining, looking up at the sky?
Its sci-fi ideas come from a little bit of a Lovecraftian angle, and more of these films do. Cosmic horror, sci-fi and horror are kind of all in the same bracket for me. I know that might be stretching it for a few people, but I feel that this is a really cool area. The Colour of Space didn't make it into this list, and I much appreciate that film. It was from the guy that had that awful Island of Dr. Moreau experience, Richard Stanley, which I didn't actually spot until after seeing the film, and that's his directorial return after the disaster of what I refer to as the Island incident.
We've sent in drones and teams of people, but nothing comes back.
So a Lovecraftian horror angle, Alex Garland at the helm, some great actors and a very high budget. Annihilation kind of did everything it said it was going to do. It performed quite well. It was released on Netflix, not via cinemas, so that one was interesting. We had a similar experience with the Cloverfield paradox. We won't talk of that again.
Check this out.
It's like they're stuck in a continuous mutation. Anything interesting in there?
No.
Its genetic angle is one I've got a lot of time for, with the area that's being contaminated spewing out all these slightly altered versions of normal animals, with sometimes really grotesque alterations. And the bear scene is very cool, but the whole time I'm just thinking, give me more of this crazy animal stuff and not this relationship drama between Natalie and Isaac. I did want to mention the finale, not the detail of it, because there is quite a lot to unpack with that, but the visuals of the creatures and alien itself in the lighthouse was awesome, and the techniques used are pretty modern. Okay, it's time for Phil Tippett's Mad God, which is only technically available on Shudder at the moment, which is a little bit annoying. It's number 3 in the list. We are at number 3. It's applicable. It's a 30-year in the making piece of animation, this, but does it show? It shows on a lot of levels, with the quality and the time spent in putting a lot of the scenes together and the set pieces, but also just how jumbled it kind of is as a story. It does play through as a consistent message, but it doesn't strike you as obvious in your first sitting. The studio, Tippett Studio, is quite big. I always thought that it was just one man in a little hut, moving these pieces around, but they're a massive team, and they still all had worked on some fairly recent films, including The Hollow Man with Kevin Bacon. That was quite a big project for them, and Tippett was involved in most of the early Jurassic Park material and most of the old Star Wars animations with the creatures and robots in that. I don't need to mention Ed 209. How much sci-fi is in this film? Well, that's quite a tough question. It's almost like Warhammer 40k sci-fi. Dirty, half-broken, brutal, rusty, dangerous, and just the whole planet, or whatever hit of hell he is in, is just filled with horrible things that want to do horrible things to everything else. There is no downtime with this film, and some of it is quite full-on. I watched it on a laptop, right, in a garden in the summer, and all these insects kept landing on my head and moss flying in my face, and there was one point where I actually had to turn it down. I had it on the headphones because there is quite a lot of excruciating noise in it, in a good way. Back to the sci-fi thing, and this is really like a steam, diesel-y, brutal punk with some excellent creatures and crazy concepts that will have you thinking about this film for a long time. Now this one is very special. This feels like the John Carpenter, Wes Craven film you never saw. It's very cool with all of its nods on the practical and the genre, even bits of Clive Barker, who I feel is the weakest of those three names. We'll get to that another time, but just can you imagine those ideas grummed into this amazing film?
Bev, don't do that. Bev!
There's bits of Hellraiser, there's bits of Kruger, there's bits of The Mouth of Madness with its Lovecraftian angle, and Occultist got the front end of a film that makes you ask so many questions. It's like the lost episode you never saw, and then of course the rest of it tries to tie it all up and give you a gory body horror finale, and it just does all of them.
I need hands up front for your stretcher.
You might be aware of a film called Psycho Gorman, which is a deliberate nod to a lot of the older 80s, 90s, practical and dark with humour, married up with quite a lot of gore and in-camera effects, and sometimes with like child actors in as well. The 80s and 90s was a very strange time for filmmaking, but back to my point, the directors that this film draws from, or ideas that it pulls to, are really kind of the best from that particular genre. It's all very well making a nod to a particular section of filming, but the section that this film takes a nod at is probably one of the best that's available to the Western market. It was the sweet spot, and it's pulled everything out and given us this.
Isn't the end.
It's going in as an honorary before we get to number 1, and it is the Love, Death and Robots series, particularly season 3. I was so impressed with it. Season 1 also extremely strong, and 2 being one of the weaker. This is incredible. I really wanted to put it in as a solid honorary because it is a group of quite a few different studios and directions of input, but it could be one of the most important horror sci-fi pieces of animated media to come out in the last 5 years. The Love, Death and Robots thing was massive.
You don't want to wake up, do you?
We have our winner in the form of Jonathan Glazier's Under the Skin, and I have spoken about this film before on the channel many moons ago. It was one of my most underrated sci-fi films of all time. It still remains firmly the case, with his other film Sexy Beast being one of the strongest UK gangster films to be made in the last 20 years. Absolute stellar piece of work. What a diverse director to be able to come from those two different directions. Both films are so different you wouldn't notice a single parallel other than how expertly shot they are, how well the locations are chosen, and how deep he goes into making sure his actors give everything they've got. It's an extremely surreal journey, this film, bringing up all manner of emotions, and some of the shots are so long and drawn out, and there's so little dialogue through certain sections that the normal person would just be like, this is not my cup of tea. But for me, it lands so well on the sci-fi now and that spooky horror aspect, and it's got this open-ended, questionable plot which isn't completely obvious. It does have a message, there's quite a few of them, and how it all works, or how they work as an alien species. That's the pitch here, that there's these two crazy aliens masquerading as humans on the planet. The abduction scenes are some of the craziest you've got out there, and there's loads of guerrilla filming, having Scarlett actually interact with people who they're even on camera. It brings up some incredible results, so I hope you've enjoyed all of that.
You don't want to wake up, do you?
Because I have been Couch Coop, and I will get back to the split screen and couch co-op content immediately, and I will see you all down there.
And we are here today to introduce a very exciting new product.